Fargo hit the cinemas in 1996, and little did the Coen brothers know back then when they released it that 18 years later it would kickstart the inspiration for a TV show which has just released its 5th season. Whilst the TV show has been criticised over the years, the movie itself is one that's highly regarded and rated amongst critics and viewers. With the most recent season of the TV show coming to an end, I thought it would be great to revisit the classic and give a breakdown on the dysfunctional story which takes us on a real journey in such a short runtime. So let's get into it. Here is a breakdown of the Fargo movie. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The inspiration behind the movie and its success. Before any dialogue is spoken in the film, we were met with a title card which read, "This is a true story. The events depicted in this film took place in Minnesota in 1987. At the request of the survivors, the names have been changed. Out of respect for the dead, the rest has been told exactly as it occurred." This is something which, when watching for the first time, you question if what we're about to go on to see is actually true. And despite it not being a true story, so to speak, the Coen brothers have said that there is actually something to it. The very reason that Fargo exists is because it was based off of a true story that the brothers stumbled across, but the actual events that unfold in the movie aren't the actual events in real life. This isn't a docudrama, but it does incorporate some of what happened from the real case. The incorporation of the title card is more of a nod to the true crime genre and a way of garnering attention and creating a talking point, despite the story itself not actually following the true events. The actual case that the Coen brothers stumbled across that inspired parts of the film is the murder of Hella Crafts. She was a young woman who was killed by her husband in 1986, and despite the full details of the crime not being depicted in the film, there were some definite similarities and inclusions that bear a somewhat resemblance. Crafts was a young woman who went missing in 1986, and police officers were suspicious of the fact that it could have been her husband that was responsible for her being gone. The authorities were unable to pin the crime on him, yet after searching their house they found some blood that was in the property. However, with no body being present there was no way of pinning him for a crime due to a lack of evidence. However, when the police looked through her husband's purchase history, they saw that he'd purchased a freezer, a chainsaw, and he'd started renting a wood chipper. Something which you may be familiar with as that was featured in the film. It was believed that Richard, her husband, assaulted her, then once she was dead, he placed her in the freezer. From there, he drove to a house along a river where she was dismembered with the chainsaw that he purchased, and then he placed her in the wood chipper. It's horrific to think that it actually happened in reality, and the dramatic nature of what we saw in the film wasn't just fictional. It was said that money was the main motivation for her husband killing her. She'd filed for a divorce and he didn't want to part way with the money that he was going to lose in the settlement. So whilst not exactly the same as what we saw in the movie, you can definitely see the inspiration and connection to the film. Is it enough for the text at the beginning? Personally, I don't think so, but it does work in luring you in and making you wonder. Fargo was the Coen brothers' 5th film that they released, and it had a budget of $7 million and it went on to gross $60 million, so I would say that it was a definite success. In 2024, that's the equivalent of it being released on a $13 million budget and going on to gross $116.5 million. So for a movie like that, it's a good performance. Now let's get on to the core theme of the movie. Fargo is a tale which is all about greed, deceit, lying, and personal gain, and the disregard of everything else when focusing on those specific things. And right at the center of this story, connecting all parts of it together, is the character Jerry Lundegaard. Somebody who is best described by his customer when selling them a car. And even though this happened so early on in the film, it was something which summed him up perfectly. He called him a bold-faced liar. Jerry had met with Carl and Gail with the intention of setting up a fake kidnapping of his wife, Jean, so that he could get his father-in-law Wade, a wealthy man, to pay the $80,000 ransom to them. In doing so, he'd split the money with them and they'd get $40,000 and Jerry would get the other half. However, what this movie is also about as well is the lying, and how one small plan where no harm was going to occur snowballed into an avalanche over the course of the runtime, and ultimately turned into a septet homicide case where many different parties were connected. When looking at the lies that Jerry told throughout the film, he lied to Carl about having a ransom of $80,000 when in actual fact he'd lied to his father-in-law and said that the kidnappers required $1 million. He had this underpinning lie that he was telling Riley at the DMAC about the cars that he was borrowing money on, as they didn't actually exist, and he was trying to get away with borrowing $320,000. He was lying to the police about knowing nothing about the missing tan-colored Sierra that was missing from his lot, because he'd given it to Carl and Gaia to carry out the kidnapping in. Plus, he was also telling Scotty to lie about the location of Jean if he was asked about it on the phone, and also to lie to Stan about where he was. So yeah, it's safe to say that calling Jerry a bold-faced liar is on point with the type of person that he actually is. In fact, it might actually be an understatement. Jerry was clearly somebody that valued money and power over everything else, so much so that he was willing to put his wife in danger in order to get some money. Not once did we ever see him look like he was fearful for Jean and the condition that she was being kept in. When it all got too much, he just went on the run because he knew that he couldn't do anything more. Begging the authorities to not take him away, it seemed like he showed no regard for the condition of his wife and the fact that she was dead. Jerry was in debt, he wanted money, and he was somebody who wasn't respected amongst those who he wanted to be respected by. For example, Wade didn't respect him at all. When Jerry came to him with a business proposition, Wade only wanted to offer him a finder's fee instead of going into business with him. Also, Wade was fearful that Jerry would mess up the negotiations with the kidnapper, and he wanted to take things into his own hands. And finally, when Jerry entered Wade's office, the awkward nature of him and the fact that there wasn't a chair for him to sit on showed the position that he held when amongst people of authority and wealth. He didn't have one. He didn't have a seat at the table. He was just an outsider. Sticking with the theme of greed and lying, this was something which was also present with Carl, one of the kidnappers. Carl eventually went on to kill Wade and took the briefcase full of money which he believed was $80,000, but when he opened it, he found that it was the $1 million. At this point, we saw Carl take out the $80,000 and bury the rest of it with the intention of going to get it after he gave Gaia his cut of the 80, not telling him the actual amount that he had. However, Carl's greed ultimately got the better of him, as even with $1 million, his main focus was on keeping the tan Sierra and not thinking about the $920,000 that he had buried, where he could have just bought another. So after belittling Gaia, he ended up dying at the hands of him with the axe, a scene that has become so iconic over time. One great moment about this though is that if Gaia had actually let Carl leave with the car, Marge Olmstead wouldn't have seen the car parked on the drive, and Gaia wouldn't have been caught in that moment as she wouldn't have stopped at the house. So Gaia's reluctance to let it go was something which also got the better of him in the end as well. There was another moment in the film which touched on the theme of lying, and it took me a while to truly understand the importance of this scene, as it kind of felt a little bit pointless. This was when Marge went to meet Mike at the restaurant for the first time in several years. Mike told a story of how his wife Linda had died and that he was devastated over what had happened to her. He told a story which was extremely believable, and Marge believed that he was struggling with everything that had gone on, when in actual fact that wasn't the case at all. He was lying to her, and it turned out that he was never married to Linda and he was just obsessed with her. He was back living with his parents and apparently had some mental health problems. This to me was something which was another small way of showing us that you can never truly know somebody that you even once knew, because they could well be lying and have different intentions. It was present with Jerry and his wife as she fell victim to the type of person that he was, and it was also present on a smaller scale with this interaction here. Some things you may have missed. Right at the end of the movie, where we saw that Gaia was putting Carl inside of the wood chipper, and when Marge was aiming the weapon at him as he was running away, it was almost a mirror image of the execution-style killing that Gaia did on the guy that was driving past when he saw Carl getting rid of the officer that they killed. This was something which I thought was a nice touch, as that moment was replicated at the end as he got caught. Another moment that I thought was a nice touch happened at around the 45-minute mark of the film. Scotty was worried about his mother and the fact that she'd been kidnapped, and Jerry just tried to calm his son down by saying that everything was going to be fine and that they just wanted money. Scotty responded with a line, "What if something goes wrong?" To which Jerry basically said that nothing would, thinking that he was in control of everything that was happening. However, by that point, 3 people had been killed and he knew nothing about it, and obviously everything that could have possibly gone wrong did, so it was a funny way of mentioning it out loud in the film for us to acknowledge. There was a moment in the film where I feel Jerry knew that by getting himself into this mess, he'd really messed things up. This was when he found Wade's body and he loaded it into his car, and on the way out he saw that the parking lot ticket guy was killed. The music that was playing in the background was somber, reflective, and with Jerry saying, "Ah geez," That was him realizing that him initiating this plan has had devastating effects for people that he loved and cared about, but also people that he'd never crossed paths with in his life. As Carl said, blood had been shed, and that was something that was definitely an understatement. 7 people had been killed when 0 was supposed to be harmed. Marge, Norm, and their contrasting life. Marge had an extremely powerful line at the end of the film, which was, "There's more to life than a little bit of money. Don't you know that?" She mentioned how all of the people that were killed for what? Just a bit of cash. Something which she couldn't quite get her head around. Marge and Norm were almost in place as the polar opposite of Jerry and Jean. We saw a couple that loved each other, and even though from an outsider looking in, their home life looked relatively mundane, realistically though, everyday living can kind of be mundane. That's the point. We appreciate when we do things that are out of the ordinary, because it's simply out of the ordinary. But they were happy together, just like most people out there are. They loved each other dearly, and them telling each other that was the last thing that we heard in the entirety of the movie, reinforcing that on one side of the film we had a husband who used his wife as leverage to get $1 million off of his father-in-law so he could line his pockets and ultimately got her killed. And on the other side we had a husband and wife who would lie in bed, eating chips, falling asleep together with a baby on the way, and they couldn't be happier. Marge was a very interesting character in the show. She was a good cop in the sense that when she was at the crime scene where the trooper and 2 civilians were killed, she was analyzing the footprints, was able to profile the 2 suspects, realized that there were 2 suspects, and also corrected her partner in letting them know that there were dealer plates which were on the car, something that her partner overlooked. We saw life from the side of the criminal, but also on the side of the person who was enforcing the law, and the polar opposites that were present made the viewing experience all the more better for it. My review of the film. I think Fargo is just a fantastic film. The amount that it gets done in such a short runtime is just remarkable. You go on a real journey where you can see something which started out as what could be described as simple, turning into something which just gets more and more out of control, until it ultimately collapses in on itself because there's no way of preventing more chaos from happening. It's a roller coaster of a ride, and as a viewer, it's not draining, as it doesn't feel like we're a part of it, like some films can make you feel, but instead, it's like we're almost on the outside looking in, which I think is great for a movie like this. The Coen brothers mentioned how they wrote this script with the actors in mind when it came to the film, and you can definitely see that with just how in touch with the characters the performers were. The casting selection was just spot on and perfect for the roles, and I don't feel you could ever really see anybody else doing the roles that were played. Minnesota is a place that I've not really seen on screen that much, and having the film set there was something which I found extremely interesting. The local dialect has such bounce and rhythm to it that it made the movie a pleasure to listen to when the actors were delivering their lines. Having quite a rhythmic accent which had a happy tone to it, contrasted with this extremely dark and bleak story, provided the conflict that I think the film was definitely going for. The environment was just as important to this film as what the story and the cast members were. The frosty temperatures and the blanket of white snow which went on for as far as the eye could see, made all of the accent colours that the showrunners wanted to be made a focus, such as the blood red at the end, the blood of Carl, the red windscreen scraper, and also the jackets pop even more. You felt the icy cold conditions, and it just felt like it made everything that little bit more difficult, something which I appreciated. This is a film that I think everybody has to watch at some point, because it's just such a good story. Even nearly 30 years later, it stood the test of time so well, and the fact that it's inspired a 5-season run of a show is telling of just how good it actually was. It's one of my favourites, and it's sitting in the top panel on my Letterboxd right now. God, I love that header image. So, there you have it, Fargo Explained. If you want to see more videos on Fargo, such as every episode from Season 5 broken down, then click on the card in the top corner, or there's a playlist on my channel containing them all. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. I actually rated Fargo over there too. So if you want to see what I gave it out of 5 stars, then head over there.